Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I am Leonardo Bencini, head of the Unit for Strategy, Global Processes and International Organizations at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Italy. I should like to welcome you all here online today for the closing plenary session of the 2021 edition of the SDG 16 Conference on Transforming Governance for a More Peaceful, Just and Inclusive Future, SDG 16, as the roadmap to respond to COVID-19 and build back better. Let me start by thanking the moderator of the previous plenary session, Stefano Manservisi, and all the other panelists who have just participated in a very thought-provoking discussion. I now have the pleasure to give the floor to the first speaker of the closing session, Giorgio Marapodi, Director General for Development Cooperation in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Italy, to make concluding remarks on behalf of the Ministry. Giorgio Marapodi, you have the floor.
Thanks, Leonardo. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of the third day of the Rome conference on SDG 16. Well, first of all, let me take this opportunity to thank Mrs. Patolizano, Assistant Secretary General at DESA, and Mrs. Beagle, Director General of IDLO, for their continued engagement, as well as all the moderators, the high-level attendees, ministers, speakers, and delegates who joined us in our discussions. Their presence has been invaluable and without any doubt has helped make the event a great success. A special thank goes as well to all those who have been involved in the organization of the event for making it possible, and to the members of the media in covering our activities and in disseminating our views to a wider audience. I believe the conference has been particularly effective in fostering an honest, inclusive, and deep discussion on the impact of the pandemic on progress towards SDG 16, providing a comprehensive overview of the challenges posed by the pandemic to governance at all levels. During these 3 days, lots of ideas, statistics, interpretation, and visions have been discussed. However, 3 key messages have clearly emerged during the conference. We have heard how COVID-19 has negatively impacted many dimensions of SDG 16. It has most impacted those who were already at risk of being left behind, including women and girls, older people, youth, people with disabilities, and groups in marginalized and vulnerable situations. Pre-existing challenges to peace, justice, and inclusion have been both exposed and magnified by the impact of the pandemic. The functioning of public institutions at all levels has been hampered. Yet, we also heard how governments, citizens, civil society, and other actors have joined forces to design and implement effective and innovative practices to enhance governance during the pandemic. They provide invaluable lessons not only for the next phase of the recovery, but also for building more resilient societies, addressing inequalities and vulnerabilities, supporting the decade of action, and delivering sustainable development agreed by world leaders in 2019. Renewing the social contract and rebuilding trust between people and governments have emerged as a major challenge and is key to making progress on all the sustainable development goals. The conference has explored some of the root causes of lack of trust in public institutions. You emphasized the importance of policies and measures at national level, sustained by international cooperation, to ensure equity in distribution of public goods and delivery of services, with a focus on those most at risk of being left behind. These policies will be important also to strengthen transparency, accountability, and oversight, to open space for participation and stakeholder engagement, to support adherence to constitutional frameworks, and the independence of judicial institutions, and to reinforce action to fight corruption. While the pandemic has created major challenges, it also provides an opportunity to rethink governance, with SDG 16 as a central pillar and the lever for transformation. The transformative actions that the health crisis is compelling governments to take, if rooted in multilateralism and global solidarity, can bring about renewed, sustained progress in achieving the 2030 agenda. Governance, institutional and policy innovations at local, national, regional, and international levels can accelerate the implementation of SDG 16 and promote integrated whole-of-society approaches needed to tackle complex, interrelated challenges such as entrenched conflict, increasing inequalities, social and economic insecurity, climate change, and rapid technological disruption. I want to assure you, and I conclude, that the government of Italy will report on the conclusions of this conference at the 2021 High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development next July, where SDG 16 will be reviewed for only the second time as one of the central goals for promoting a sustainable and resilient recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. A peaceful, just, and inclusive recovery will be possible only through transparent and accountable institutions which can guarantee the rule of law, good governance, human rights, gender equality, and environmental sustainability. I believe that a continued exchange between member states, independent authorities, the judiciary, multilateral partners, civil society, and all the relevant actors is crucial to build back better and leaving no one behind. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, SDG 16's implementation requires collective, coordinated, and continued efforts. Let's increase, intensify, and elevate our actions towards a full SDG 16 implementation. I'll thank you all, and I wish you the best.
Thank you very much for these concluding remarks. It is now my pleasure to give the floor to Ms. Maria Francesca Spatolisano, Assistant Secretary General for Policy Coordination and Interagency Affairs in the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, a co-organizer of the conference, along with the International Development Law Organization and Italy. Ms. Spatolisano also kindly facilitated the plenary sessions of the second day of the conference. Ms. Spatolisano, could you please share with us your impressions of some of the main messages that you have seen emerge from this conference? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Minister Bencini. And Excellencies, Ambassador Giorgio Marapodi, Director General for Development Cooperation in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Italy, Ms. Gian Vigo, the Director General of the International Development Law Organization, distinguished participants, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. We have reached the third day of this SDG 16 conference. This has been an incredibly rich event, both in content and participants. I would like to extend my gratitude to the government of Italy for sponsoring this event for the second time. I would like to thank the International Development Law Organization for partnering again with the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs in the organization of this event. I thank all the participants for their insights and contributions to the discussions and deliberations of the conference, which, let me already here remind you, will continue after the session with the 3 final parallel sessions later today. This conference has been a moment of reflection on challenges and opportunities to achieve more peaceful, just, and inclusive societies as a response to COVID-19 and in the post-COVID context. Interventions throughout the conference have highlighted the critical importance of governance and public institutions to fight against the pandemic and for our collective journey to an inclusive and sustainable recovery from it. Several important messages resonated throughout our virtual platform. First, I would like to say governance capacity at all levels not only has proven critical for timely, just, and inclusive response to the pandemic, but it has also influenced the level of public confidence in public institutions. Second, despite the enormous challenges it has posed, the crisis can be a catalyst for transformation and can provide an opportunity to reimagine the role of institutions and policymaking. Third, attaining sustainable development in the wake of the COVID-19 requires a comprehensive and coordinated effort to make governance more people-centered and reflective of the voices and needs of women, men, girls, boys, and all those at risk of being marginalized. Fourth, resilience to shocks and crises cannot be achieved without policy coordination and all of society approaches that address discriminatory norms and social practices and aims to reduce inequalities. Fifth, strengthening transparency and accountability and addressing corruption risks through an integrated and all of society approach will be paramount to ensure the effectiveness of the response and recovery plans. Sixth, promoting gender equality, as well as the participation, representation, and leadership of women and girls in policy spaces and decision-making at all levels, including in these recovery plans we're talking about, is key to building back better. Seven, an equitable, timely, and effective delivery of public services, including health, education, social services, is essential to building greater public confidence and trust in government. It also will help accelerate progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. And eighth and last point, the governments have successfully used the digital platforms and digital tools to keep the wheels of government turning and continue to deliver essential public services during the pandemic. Accelerated action is needed to address the digital divides and make digital government a positive force for inclusion. So all these messages, your messages, resonated very clearly. SDG 16 is a fundamental underpinning of sustainable development and a key enabler and an entry point to deliver on the 2030 agenda. With only 9 years remaining till 2030, SDG 16 should be utilized as a framework to address critical challenges related to the pandemic and shape the post-pandemic response in support of sustainable development. I'm confident that the outcome of this conference will provide important and timely inputs to the review of SDG 16 at the high-level political forum on sustainable development next July. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I'm now pleased to give the floor to Ms. Jan Beagle, Director General of the International Development Law Organization, which co-organized this conference along with UNDESA and Italy. Thank you, Ms. Beagle, also for kindly facilitating the plenary sessions of the first day of this conference. Ms. Beagle, we would greatly appreciate your thoughts as to the main messages that you see we should project on the important topics that have been addressed at this conference. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Maripodi, Assistant Secretary General Spatolisano, colleagues and friends. It's a pleasure to join you again as we come towards the end of the second SDG 16 conference. Over the last 3 days, we have examined our shared fragility, looked at ways to renew the social contract, and explored how to turn challenges into opportunities. There was consensus that even before the pandemic, the world was not on track to achieve SDG 16 and the 2030 agenda, and COVID-19 threatens to set us back significantly. Pre-existing challenges, including increased poverty and inequality, growing fragility and insecurity, and a lack of trust in governments and institutions, have magnified the impact of the crisis and hampered response and recovery efforts. But perhaps most importantly, we agreed that COVID-19 is a wake-up call. By exposing our vulnerability and lack of preparedness for crises, it has the potential to shock the world into action. It is clear that the principles of rule of law, human rights, and democratic governance that form the core of SDG 16 and cut across the entire 2030 agenda must guide our efforts. And as Dr. Tedros reminded us during the first session, in the time of COVID-19, good governance can be the difference between life and death. We have heard experiences and examples of good practices at local, national, regional, and international levels that can help guide the way forward. And some clear themes were evident across the 3 days. First, leaving no one behind and reaching the furthest behind first are essential. COVID-19 is redefining the concept of vulnerability. As we have seen, no one is entirely immune to the devastating impact of the pandemic, but the most severely affected are those already living in conditions of poverty and exclusion. The impact on women and girls and on young people has threatened to roll back decades of hard-won gains. Fragile and conflict-affected contexts have been hard hit, with the potential to create persistent islands of poverty and insecurity. Ensuring that no one is left behind in the recovery requires a rights-based approach to social protection and access to public services. And the rule of law is key to tackling the multiple, intersecting, and overlapping layers of discrimination and empowering people to claim their rights. Women must be included at all levels of decision-making and their perspectives and needs taken fully into account in response and recovery. Second, to rebuild trust, we need to make laws and institutions work for people. The justice gap can only be narrowed if legal systems are reoriented towards justice for all and not just the few. A people-centered approach is needed to empower justice seekers and to promote fairer and more satisfactory outcomes. Corruption is a growing driver of discontent and a challenge to sustainable development. We need to combat it through improved prevention, detection, and prosecution to increase effectiveness and public trust. Third, innovation is essential. Technology can be a great equalizer and a catalyst for transformative change, but we must improve our understanding of the needs of people living in conditions of vulnerability and exclusion and ensure equitable access to avoid further widening the digital divide. Lastly, success requires collective action and whole of society approaches. The challenge is ultimately one of leadership, and we all need to do our part. This conference is proof that each of us brings something unique to the table. Governments have shared innovative policy measures and responses based on data and science. Multilateral institutions highlighted new frameworks for addressing fragility, strengthening prevention, and building resilience. Civil society representatives showcased good practices at the grassroots level, from improving the accountability of local government to providing virtual legal assistance. And young leaders demonstrated the importance of engaging and empowering youth through intergenerational dialogue, increased representation, and greater access to opportunity. It is clear that a renewed commitment to cooperation and solidarity centered around the 2030 agenda is needed to tackle challenges that are too big and too complex for any of us to solve alone. And it is in this spirit that we organize this conference. I would like to thank all of you, our distinguished speakers, and our engaged and energized participants for taking time to discuss these crucial issues. I would also like to express my renewed appreciation to our host, the Government of Italy, and to the Department of Economic and Social Affairs for their continued partnership and for the solidarity in organizing this conference. Finally, let me just say that justice lies at the heart of what makes development inclusive and sustainable. As Mr. Zamet Kutaya said to us just in the last session, just yesterday, Germany's constitutional court ruled that national laws to tackle climate change are partly unconstitutional because the targets place an unfair burden on future generations. So empowered citizens and effective laws and institutions have a critical role to play in rebuilding trust, renewing the social contract, and building societies that are more resilient in the face of crises like COVID-19. As part of our contribution to this collective effort, IDLO is launching a roadmap for a rule of law-based recovery, which sets out 8 priority actions to help guide the way to a more peaceful, just, and inclusive future. Getting there will not be easy. Building a culture of justice requires sustained commitment, but it is the best investment we can make in our collective future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Beagle. Very many thanks to the speakers and to all the participants who have been following us online. I should mention before closing that the last 3 parallel sessions of this year's SDG 16 conference will be convened after a short break. We will, of course, ensure that also the results of the deliberation of these sessions will be fully incorporated into the final outcome of the conference. We look forward to seeing you at the 3rd edition of the SDG 16 conference, when we very much hope we'll be able to meet in person in Rome. See you then. Thank you very much.